Good afternoon, and welcome to the afternoon keynote of Common Dialogue Day. I am Julius Nagy. I teach in the Department of Chemistry, and before we introduce our speaker, I would like to, on behalf of Sister Peg and the ECA and the rest of the university, like to thank our committee for putting together today's program. So please give them all a hand and stand if you are here. And this afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing our afternoon keynote speaker. Mary Ellen Vicksta was born in Racine, Wisconsin, and as it turns out, was educated by Racine Dominicans. So there's a commonality that we had that I didn't even know about. Mary Ellen attended Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, where her degree was in biology and field biology, which enabled her to make a couple of trips to Costa Rica to do field biology. And then she became her professor's assistant, so her background is in science. Her career then led her to Kimberly-Clark, which is where our paths crossed in the late 90s, and she began to do market research. After a long career there, she then retired and started her own business, Vicksta Innovation Partners. It is because of Mary Ellen's influence that I became familiar with the creative problem-solving process. And Kimberly-Clark was doing ethnography before most people knew what ethnography was, so that was something else that we share. So I welcome Mary Ellen to Siena Heights and look forward to her talk.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I'm being live streamed at the same time, so I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Did everybody get a handout? Yes. Perfect. And so the handout is to enable you to have the key takeaways from this. So my talk is all about looking around. So what we're going to be spending the next 45 minutes is talking and experiencing looking. So the first thing that you're going to do is look at me when I am enjoying a hotel in Naples, Italy. And the key thing here that just you never expected in a hotel is to have actual artwork decorating and simulating what you would expect, like a TV, et cetera, in a lounge. And so I thought, wow, this is like the perfect place. And every single floor, 3 floors, were decorated in this way. So sometimes it's amazing what you don't anticipate. And if you spend a little bit more time observing your world, not through your phone necessarily, but observing the world around you. And so what I've been doing for the past 25 plus years is specializing in creativity and innovation. And so I got started when I was in marketing research at Kimberly-Clark, based in Appleton, Wisconsin. And somebody invited me to go to this conference. And I was really busy at work. You know, it's kind of like when you have the time of the school year and you have papers due and exams to study for, and you're feeling pressured to go home for Thanksgiving, and all this stuff is happening. Well, that's how I felt this day in June in 1992. But a couple of my friends said, it would be good for you to go, Mary Ellen, to this particular conference. And so late on Friday night, the conference started on Saturday, I faxed, this is long enough ago, so I actually used a fax machine, you know, the thing that transmits over. Yeah, so I used one of those. So they accepted my registration, and then in those days called a travel agent, and the travel agent set me up for the flight. My expectations were low about what this is going to be. First day of the conference, my expectations went from here to here. I found my tribe. And so what happened is that I not only learned how to better come up with ideas, but I learned a pathway. I learned tools. I learned all sorts of things that can help me, as well as others that I work with, to go from an idea to actually implementing the idea. And so that happened, or started for me in 1992. And so I was able to bring that to my corporation as well as to others. And that's how, as Julius mentioned, we work together at Kimberly-Clark. So what I'm going to share with you today is one aspect of thinking about a tool that can help you in your life. So this is really a life skill, a life skill. So let me move to the next. Okay, so the question, how are you spending time with your eyes? How are you spending time with your eyes? So I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to think about that. How are you spending time with your eyes? Now turn to the person next to you and share. Introduce yourselves. How are you spending time with your eyes? Okay, I'm going to cut you off right now, and I'm going to show you some research that I found. And so, most people spend about 5 hours looking at a screen. Looking at a screen. 5 hours looking at a screen. And you pick up this thing, and I'm as bad as everybody else. You pick up that thing 50 to 60 times a day. So, and there's been a lot of talk about this lately, lots of talk about this. So the source came from a study done by Larry Rosen earlier this year. And now that Apple has come up with, you can check your screen time and what you've been doing, a lot of that was based on this type of research that was done earlier. So, what can you do instead of spending time looking at a screen? First of all, this compares social usage with watching TV and other things, and extrapolating out, if you spent a whole year thinking about how much time you spend on your screen, what else do you also spend your time on? Again, averages. This is done by hacker.com. So, what if you did other things? And the thing that intrigued me about this particular slide was I could watch the Simpsons series 215 times instead of spending time on my phone. But instead, what I'm going to encourage you guys to do is not look at these kinds of activities, but spend time looking. Not with the phone, but just looking at the world around you. Looking at the world around you. Because observation is one of the key things that leads to creativity and innovation. Observation is key to creativity and inspiration. So, in thinking about that, there was one person, about 80 years ago, that was observing a farmer plowing his field, going like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. Okay? So follow me once again. Farmer plowing the field. He was just observing that. And he was able to make a connection. He had an insight that he could transform this into something, a problem that he was working on. What he happened to be working on is cathode ray tubes and trying to figure out kind of the fundamentals of what eventually became television. And so that movement that he saw in the farmer's field is exactly how in the early cathode ray tubes, the electrons would print the picture. Okay, you guys following me on this? Now, granted, we don't use cathode ray tubes anymore. We've moved beyond that. But the key thing here is observation. And sometimes you don't have to have something in mind in order to have it come into play later and lead to creativity and innovation. Another person who, in a totally different field. As Julius explained, my whole background was biology, and especially field biology. So one person that I really respect is Jane Goodall. And Jane Goodall, what she did that was so phenomenal is that she sat and observed. She watched the chimps. She watched how they interplayed without judgment, and just watched and observed. And totally revolutionized how we think about not only apes, but also how we think about organisms in general, and spending more time observing rather than just taking prior things for granted. So her observations led to the fact that she observed that chimps actually use tools. And before that, the prior knowledge was all about only man uses tools. So it closed in the relationship between man and the rest of the animal world. So that's one of the things that comes out of observations. So creativity, observational tools are key. The other part of this is enhancing curiosity and wonder. So by observing, you become more curious about the world around you. And you get a history of different experiences in your head and you never know when that's going to come into some sort of idea and innovation. So you're thinking about looking, that's the observation, then you internalize that, you think about that. You come up with insights, you come up with inspiration, and then that leads to action. So what we're going to be spending the rest of our time is thinking about specific looking skills. Specific looking skills. So I had a good fortune of a couple of years ago doing a pre-conference workshop. And one of the attendees at the workshop was another keynoter at this particular conference. And he and his co-author wrote the book, The Experience Economy. And the Experience Economy is a book that talks about, instead of just using the ingredients to make a cake, what has more value is having an experience around the whole birthday celebration. And people will pay more for that. And people will get more out of that experience. And so they're the ones that actually brought to light, which the design thinking community took over and ran with. So think about Disney experiences in every part of your life. And that's what our world has become more of. Experiences rather than buying products or commodities. And so James Gilmore wrote this book called Look. And this is the premise of the skills, the looking skills that I'm going to share with you today. And he came on this idea of this particular way of looking based on attending a workshop. Observing, thinking, and then acting. So, James Gilmore. So, I'm going to share with you, and you have on your sheet of paper, so the handout that you have in front of you, I'm going to summarize, I'm going to walk you through it, and then you can take notes either on the handout or something else that you have there. So you're going to have the 6 looking glasses to help you out. So, first, looking. This is what Jane Goodall did a lot of, looking through binoculars. Looking through binoculars. And what does binocular looking provide? It allows you to survey a situation. So I can look over a crowd. I can look into the forest. I can look onto the Mediterranean. I can look at a store. So I can look at the big picture associated with anything. And what I'm doing is surveying and scanning the world in front of me. And I'm observing what I'm seeing. When do I use this? When sometimes I can't see the forest from the trees. So it's a thinking mode or a looking or an observational mode that allows me to not get caught into detail, but to look at the big picture. The big picture. So if I'm thinking about this a little bit and doing this, I spend a lot of time in airports because I love to travel. Sometimes I'm by myself, sometimes I'm with my husband, sometimes I'm with my daughter, sometimes I'm with colleagues. So which airport is this? Anybody recognize it? Detroit? Did I hear Detroit? Yeah, that's Detroit. What terminal is this? McNamara? What airline flies into this? Delta. Yay, Delta. Okay? So big picture. Airports are a wonderful place to survey and scan. You can see, how people interact waiting to get on a plane, or not interact. You can see how people go from one gate to another. You can see whether there's agents or not available for you to talk to, or if there's a kiosk where you can figure out how to change your boarding pass. So there's lots of different things that you can survey and scan. You can use binocular vision. And instead of being upset because your plane's delayed for 2 hours, you can actually practice using a looking skill called binocular and just look at the world around you. So, you may not recognize this particular airport unless somebody has been here. Anybody been at this airport? Anybody recognize it? Back there? Huh? Okay, this is Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon. And so my daughter lives in Portland, so I go to this airport a lot. It was ranked like #1 in the US, customer satisfaction stuff. And so this is an example. I was just walking around the airport looking for something to do because my flight was delayed. And so what do I see? But I see a movie house. So what they did, so I went from binocular thinking, I said, oh, this is pretty interesting, to I have 3 hours to kill before my flight. So I went inside, and what do they have? Independent films, shorts, which were actually pretty interesting. Done, a lot of them done by students like yourselves. Some of them done by people who just got out of school on great little subjects. And I wouldn't have been able to find that if I hadn't done binocular looking, and then saying, I'm curious about what's inside. Are they going to sell me stuff? Or are they actually showing movies? And they actually show movies. And sometimes they do, long-run films. I don't think they're showing Toy Story 4, though. I don't think. So I'm going to move you. So binoculars, survey, and scanning, looking at the big picture. Okay? Now I'm going to show you another looking glass, and this one's called Bifocal Looking. And so bifocals, traditionally, you have a portion of the lens that allows you to see far away, another portion of the lens that allows you to see close. Okay? So this particular looking glass is all about having two contrasting ways of looking. So it could be near far, it could be black and white versus color, it could be blurry versus clear, it could be male versus female, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, male and female, it could be young and old. So what you're doing here is you're trying to have two different points of view and compare and contrast them. Compare and contrast. And the way you use this is if you are trying to overcome some personal biases that you might have. So you traditionally look at things in one particular way. Well, take another way of looking at it and compare and contrast. So I'm going through that airport again, and I came upon some artwork. And the way I wanted to look at this is, again, bifocal looking. And in my mind, what would that look like in black and white? What would that look like in color? I take a lot of photographs, and so oftentimes, if you're looking for patterns, et cetera, black and white is a great way to bring out or have you look at patterns. So for me, sometimes looking at things, whether it's a piece of art in the airport or just looking at the world, how would that look in black and white? How would that look in color? So two different points of view and getting two different ways of looking at the world. Second looking glass. Another way of looking at that is clarity versus blurriness. So the middle part was clear of this particular piece of art. The outer part is intentional blurry. Or you can switch it around where the middle part is very blurry and the outer part is. So it's looking at it again in two different ways. Two different ways. So bifocal looking, comparing and contrasting. Next looking glass is a magnifier. So imagine I have a magnifier in my hands, and I'm trying to concentrate light on a single spot. So like when we were kids, what we would do is we'd take the magnifying glass and then unfortunately try to burn ants. But the point of this is taking the magnifier and really spotlighting that on one piece and looking very intently at one piece. And so you're really focusing what you're looking at. And you really want to look at it very closely and look and look. And so if I'm going back to Jane Goodall again, she not only used binocular looking to survey the entire scene, but she also did a lot of magnifying, looking for a long period of time, watching how the chimps interacted with each other, and seeing how they would how a mother chimp would work with and teach young. And so that would be the whole aspect of magnifying, really looking intently at one part. And so, again, I'm going through, in this case, the Portland Airport. I saw this piece of art. Then I'm looking more closely. And then I'm looking as close as I possibly can. So to see the individual pieces of fabric that were rolled up, which created the look that this particular artist was trying to achieve. You can't tell so much here, but there's a three-dimensionality aspect of it as well that was really pretty cool. At an airport, waiting for my plane to take off. Okay, so magnifying glass, looking very intently. Now, another looking glass that James Gilmore introduced is rose-colored looking. So often what people do is they see an idea and rip it apart. They think of everything possible that could go wrong. Or they think of every reason why that particular idea can't be implemented. What rose-colored looking is all about is looking at the positives. In fact, looking at the positives so intently that you overlook the flaws. That you overlook the flaws. Because you really want to see what is good about this idea, what is good about what you're looking at, what is good about the scene that you see in front of you. And so you really accent the positives. You really accent the positives. And what you're looking for, and I work a lot on the very, very front end of innovation, you know, where there's not even a white space. There's nothing. It's truly ambiguous. It's truly a mess oftentimes. And so, but looking at the world through rose-colored glasses helps to uncover opportunities. Helps to uncover opportunities. And that's very key to innovation. What are the opportunities? What might be? So, thinking about my whole 3-hour layover in the Portland Airport is the positive that came to me as I was thinking about this is having very colorful artwork. And this is throughout the Portland Airport. I just showed you a small segment. Will allow people to really smile at an airport as they go from gate to gate. And they may even stop and pause and look at the art that's in front of them. So the next time you go through the airport, because there's actually in Detroit, there's some art as well, I've noticed, is pay attention to the surroundings. Do some binocular looking, survey the scene. You might want to do some magnifying looking, look very intently at one spot. You might want to look at a contrast of new and old, or big and small, or appropriate, inappropriate. But just think of two different ways of looking at that world, which would be bifocal thinking. And then take a step back and just think rose-colored. What is positive about it? What is positive about it on steroids? What really, really stands out? What are the opportunities? So I'm going to show you another example. So I'm going to switch gears here. And we're just going to look at another example of looking through looking glasses. So I kind of showed you a sequence, and I'm going to walk you through another sequence, okay? And so we're on a walk, and this happens to be in Toronto. So I want you to talk to your partner or somebody next to you about what you see using binocular vision here. So looking at the big picture. So talking to your partner, what do you see? Okay, I'm going to cut you off for a second here because, you know, this is demonstration purposes. So, and we're going to do a little interaction. So you two guys right here, what did you see? What's one thing that you saw?
People coming together.
Okay, people coming together. People coming together. Okay, this group here, what did you see?
Apartments or office buildings.
Okay, apartments or office buildings. Okay, over here, Julius, what did you guys see?
I saw the heart with the basketball in the center, and it looks like possibly drips of blood at the bottom of the heart.
Ooh, drips of blood. Okay, anybody see anything differently than what's been mentioned so far? Yes?
The splatter on the side.
Uh-huh.
Everything's so clean, and then there's that one spot.
There's that one spot. Okay, so just building off of that, so what you might want to do if you're doing a sequence, you see that one spot, then the next looking glass you might want to look at is magnifying glass to really zoom into what's going on there. Okay, yes?
It looks like they have tattoos, but it reminds me of like the weavings from different cultures.
Ah, the weavings of different cultures. The weavings, and that's another thing that the next glass that you might want to use is the magnifying glass so that you can more intently study those tattoos or pictures. Okay? So it's scanning the playground, like I mentioned. And then here's another view. So what I did is I moved actually further back. And so, but what I'm really doing here is bifocal looking. Okay? So talk to your partner again, and what two things do you think could be contrasted there? So what could be contrasted there? Okay, I'm going to cut you off again, but I'm going to look for a volunteer. Anybody who wants to mention two things that might be contrasted there. Yes, in the back.
It looks like it's a cold, lonely city, but if you come to the basketball court where everybody, different races, different genders, come together and love and just come together.
Okay, so cold city, warm playground. Okay, could be one way. Okay, anybody else over here?
Siena Tower is the home of everything entertainment and news and everything Canadian. It's like an iconic Canadian symbol, and that is part of the Canadian community, but then it's also in contrast to the community of playing basketball.
Okay.
So I feel like I'm putting my value of the community of basketball, pulling that out of me to see it there.
Okay. Okay, so if you had to talk about the two contrasting things, it would be icon of Canadian news, and then kind of the icon of basketball. Is that a way to put it, or? Okay. There was somebody else that had their hand up over. Yes.
You kind of talked about it's like big uptown city life up the top, and then yes, with the basketball on the bottom, but also the trees and the transition. Like we talked about it being a little transition set, like uptown city life, and it kind of warms into more of a community setting with the trees in the center.
Yeah, so uptown city life, and then more of a residential feel to it. All right. So do you kind of get a feel for bifocal here is looking at two contrasting things. And so every person's journey might be a little bit different on how they describe it. That's okay. The key thing is that you're comparing and contrasting and thinking about what those contrasts mean. Whether it's the icon of Canadian broadcasting, or the icon of basketball, or urban versus residential, you know, kind of thing. Okay, everybody got that? It's a great way of looking at the world, bifocal. And so the way I was looking at this, and again, every person's interpretation is different, is work on top, play on the bottom. Work on top, play on the bottom. Okay, magnify. So we're going to concentrate on one spot, and it's just the murals at the end of the court. Now, you've seen this before, but the whole thing about magnify is that you get up close and personal. And a couple people mentioned earlier about, you know, that tattoos, and then really looking at those tattoos and pictures, and trying to figure out, is it a heritage thing? Does it represent different groups of people, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way of looking at that. And so this park was really interesting because if you turned around, then this was the view on the other side. This was the view on the other side. So the whole thing about looking at the front and then turning around, because sometimes the cool things are the things behind you, and then, oh, look at that. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that colorful in the middle of the city? So then I said another way, the next thing to think about would be rose-colored. So looking at this particular journey, Toronto, the city of Toronto, is that they're creating these very interesting city spaces where people can go outside and interact. So when I took pictures of the basketball court, I had to wait for people to get off the court, you know, and fortunately it was time to move on to another thing, so they were just naturally breaking up. But it was really pretty cool to be in Toronto and see these spots. I took a walk a little further that day, and the picture that I didn't include is a picture of a fountain that all the spouts for the fountain were all dogs. A dog fountain, and at the top of the fountain, they had a dog bone. And in fact, when I got there, one of the guys had his dog, and the dog just jumped in with the rest of the clay dogs and was frolicking with them. Of course, they didn't respond. And, but there were people around this all the time, just interacting and watching the people, the fountain itself. People would pose for selfies, et cetera, et cetera. So making a space more pleasant, more colorful, more interactive, so people go out of their homes and interact with each other and in their city. So that's an example of a sequence. So I went from binocular looking, scanning the whole thing, to bifocal looking, looking at the contrast, in my mind, work versus play, but we had some excellent examples of other ways of looking at it, magnifying on one spot, and then lastly, thinking about rose-colored. So that gives you a sense of how you can employ these different looking ways, these different looking modes, in order to create a more holistic picture. So another way to use this is, since this is Common Dialogue Day, is to think about having an excursion, and everybody has a sequence of looking glasses to go through, and has an observation sheet, and then people go out, do their looking, come back, and then dialogue about what they've observed, glass by glass. And then what did you really learn from this? More discussion. How might we apply this? Okay? Kind of got that sequence of events. So you have 6, I've only shown you 4 glasses. I'm going to go back to my other presentation, show you the other couple really, really quickly. And so the next one is Microscope Looking. And this took me a little while to figure out the difference between magnifying and microscope. And so microscope, imagine a microscope, and you're moving the glass slide around. And you're looking very intently at more and more detail. You're changing the ocular to magnify things even more. But you're moving the slide around. So the thing with microscope looking is that you are looking around a scene, but looking at the details that are there, as if you were operating a microscope, especially moving that slide around. So you're really scrutinizing. And another important thing that we sometimes forget, but leads to a lot of innovation, is we're looking at the edges. We're looking at the detail at the edges. Not that we wouldn't look at the center, but we want to look at the edges as well. So microscope looking is looking around for more and more detail and including the edges. So I'm just showing you this example right now. This is flying over the Columbia River Gorge. And this is separating, the Columbia is separating Oregon from Washington. And so the microscope looking would be, I take this, and whoops, maybe it'll work this way. I'm taking this, and I'm moving it around, and I'm creating even more detail, or a bigger look. So I'm maximizing this to see what the details are. And I might even turn it on its side a little bit. And then this is kind of intriguing to me. Why is that so brown? You know, why is that particular part so brown? Now, this wasn't that long after some fires were out there, so it could have been part of the fire. So microscope looking, I'm actually spending time and looking around, looking at the edges, and magnifying things. Okay, so last one, blindfold looking. Blindfold looking is a little bit different than the other looking glasses. So you're literally being blindfolded and thinking about what you have seen in the past and recalling it. Or you're looking out into the future and trying to envision what the future might be. Okay? So you're looking, but it's in your mind's eye. And so when I was recently flying out to Portland, 6 months earlier I flew out, and I remember this beautiful look at Mount Hood in April, after all the snow kind of was covering it. And you couldn't see any of the ski runs, but it was just a nice flyby. So I went back through my photos and tried to find this. So I recalled it first in as much detail as I possibly could come up with. And then I looked back at the photo and kind of compared it to what I remembered. But the key thing here in blindfold is to look to the past and try to recall as many details as possible about the situation, the product that you're using, the experience you're having. Or look to the future and do the same thing. What might it be? Okay? Questions? And we're not going to spend any more time on these two besides the fact that they're there. So, summarizing. Very simple. Practice looking every day. Instead of picking up your phone, leave it down and just spend 5 minutes looking at the world around you. Pick one looking glass and do some observation. Thank you. Questions?
If anybody has any questions, we will you have one back there, great. So any questions? Everything was crystal clear.
Well, they saw 6 ways of looking at things.
So using these various
Glasses.
glasses, which one have you found that people that you've worked with, businesses, have the most difficult using? Which glass is the hardest for them?
I would say 2. Believe it or not, binocular vision, seeing the big picture, because people tend to get too much in the detail. Secondly, rose-colored, because they tend to look at all the negatives. So those are the hardest.
Hi, Mary Ellen. Thank you for your presentation. I was curious, you talked about observing with the eyes. Could you give us any advice about using our other senses
Absolutely.
when it comes to observing?
Absolutely. First, I would encourage you to concentrate on developing the skill using the 6 looking glasses and looking. Then, as you become more experienced, then bring in every other sense. So if I look at Jim Gilmore's book, one of the last chapters talks about all the other senses. And in the work that I've been doing, I love doing multisensory things. And so we'll start out with the looking glasses in the pure form of looking. And then later on, okay, let's go back to that experience and now experience it through the looking glasses, but we want all the senses to be engaged.
Is there a particular lens that you think a college student should really focus on?
I think the lens depends on your personality. So if your personality is, I do a lot, I think a lot in details, then I would focus in on binocular looking. If your personality is, you really, really like to look at all the downsides of everything, spend some time looking at rose-colored. So I would say it's individually determined, and use the lens that's the opposite of what your natural tendency would be. Although I would have to say rose-colored might be a good one too to look for opportunities.
I have the microphone, but I think I can speak loud enough. Is there any connection? Hold on. All right, thank you. Any connection to learning styles to these various lenses, I wonder?
I think how you actually describe and make your observations is very much going to be dependent on your learning style. So those people that are very visual learners, like myself, it's going to be very pictorial. Those people that are very verbal, like my husband, they'll go and observe, and it will be like an audio recording as they go through things. So I think it very much has to do with how they manifest their observations. And then those people that are kinesthetic learners, they're going to be talking more about the movement that they see, and then the activities and the experiences that are associated with their observations. So yeah, there's a relationship, but it has to do with how they describe the observations, which actually brings to the richness when you have several people using the same looking glass sequence. You come together, you have different learning styles, and then you have the discussion. So you can have a very, very rich, very multifaceted discussion as a consequence.
What made you decide to start looking into creativity and innovation, like going from biology and field biology?
There's actually, the kind of biology I was doing is similar to Jane Goodall. I was spending hours after hours after hours actually looking through binoculars at the critters that I was watching, observing, and then documenting their behavior. And so, it wasn't much, and the other part of that is a lot of mathematical modeling of what their behavior was. And so it wasn't a big leap for me to go from there to marketing research, because again, it was observing how people interacted with products. It was to look at people's habits and practices as they were going about their everyday activities, no matter what it was. And then lastly, to model those behaviors, again, using simulated test markets and any other kind of way of modeling behavior. So to me, it wasn't a big stretch at all. But I needed to think about consciously. It's kind of like what Bill mentioned earlier, you know, thinking about what your strengths are and then recognizing those and then selling. When I went into marketing research, I was an experiment. Everybody else had their graduate degree in marketing, and I did not. I was a product developer, you know, and I was the experiment. I was the experiment that worked because we got a lot of great work done together. Julius and I did a lot of great work, and so they hired more product developers and forgot about those masters in marketing.
And the looking was really a revelation in market research, because you used to sit people in a focus group room and ask them questions about how they use products. And
Yep.
It turns out they weren't necessarily lying, but they weren't thinking about the things that product developers think about, so they couldn't give you the feedback. By watching them, you get more of what you need to develop the next product than by asking them questions. And when you couple the two together, that's where it really makes a big difference. So ethnography was really a big step forward.
And I did a lot of ethnography associated with stores. And so I was working with a bunch of packaging engineers a couple years ago. And, you know, they were talking about this composite material and, you know, the melt ratio of, you know, making sure that the seal could open without being very difficult. And then they talked about how wonderful the graphics were. So we went on a little excursion to a store and looked at the display for this particular product that they were putting packaging together for, and it was all the same. No brand stood out from any other brand. Every single producer was using the same type of package. Nothing stood out. And it wasn't until we got into the store and saw that it caused the packaging engineers to think very differently about how they're making their package and how they're doing the graphics for the package. So, you know, those are the kinds of insights by looking, observing, that lead to differentiated products and services in the marketplace.
Any other questions?
I hope I'm not breaking the rules. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Oh, is that Bill?
Just don't ask her about Toy Story 4. She knows nothing.
Hey, you know what? I heard the ending was really good.
Yes, fantastic. First, the breakdown of how we observe stuff was fantastic. That was really great. And putting it in such simple terms, really, it's like, yeah, you get it. That was so nice. I just have curiosity about how do children observe things versus how maybe we see things as we get older, and how we could benefit from getting those? Do you notice a way children really observe the world and we lose that? Or
Yeah. And so if you talk about this with kids, so you just set it up a little bit, they get it like instantaneously. You know, they just eat it up. And so another interesting thing to do is go on a little looking tour, same thing, but have kids and adults, or various ages, and then come together and talk about your observations, or have a dialogue about it. Really, really enlightening, very enlightening.
Great, thanks.
If there are no other questions, we will thank Mary Ellen and then move to our next venues.